We all have ghosts from our past that follow us into the bright lights of the present. Explore the haunting stories of what we leave behind and the memories that refuse to fade away over time. Hit subscribe now and help us face the ghosts of the past.
The roles were already on the table when it hit me that this time last year I didn't know what my son was capable of. I'd been standing at the kitchen counter, pulling the bread basket toward me, and for a second I just stood there, holding it, the smell of yeast and butter, the sound of the football game drifting in from the living room, my granddaughter Lily arguing with her tablet in the other room. Everything exactly the way Thanksgiving is supposed to feel. And yet, I set the basket down and went back to stirring the gravy. My name is not important. What I am is a 67-year-old retired civil engineer who spent 31 years calculating load tolerances and stress points in concrete and steel. I am someone who believed, for most of his adult life, that if you paid attention to the details, if you checked your measurements twice and never assumed, you would catch the problems before they became catastrophes. I did not apply that same rigor to my family. That is the part I have to live with. My wife Carol passed in the spring of 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 59 years old. After she died, the same house we'd raised our son in, the one in Dayton with the big sycamore out front that Carol always said needed to come down, felt like a building I was just storing myself in. I rattled around in it for about 8 months before I figured out a new rhythm. My son Wesley moved back from Columbus the following year. He said he wanted to be closer. Said Dayton had more opportunity than people gave it credit for. He had a girlfriend, Marissa, who had a daughter from a previous relationship, a little girl named Lily, 4 years old at the time, with her mother's dark eyes and a laugh that could embarrass you in a grocery store. I liked Marissa well enough. She was quiet in a way that I sometimes confused for depth. They got engaged in the fall of 2021. I gave Wesley his grandmother's ring to use. He proposed at a restaurant. Lily threw her dessert on the floor in excitement, and I sat across the table feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 years, which was that my life might still have forward motion. I should have paid closer attention to the measurements. By last Thanksgiving, Wesley and Marissa had been married 14 months. They were living in the condo I'd helped them put the down payment on, a nice 2-bedroom near the Oregon district, the kind of place young couples start out in when someone else helps them start. I didn't think about the money as a loan. I thought about it as planting something. Lily was 6 by then. She called me Pop Pop, which Carol would have found insufferably charming. I picked her up from school on Tuesdays because Marissa worked late and Wesley had a standing thing with his colleagues, some networking dinner downtown that he mentioned once and then never elaborated on. Lily and I had a routine, drive through for chocolate milk, then the park if it wasn't raining, then cartoons at my kitchen table while I made something simple for her dinner. She was a serious child for her age. Observant. She noticed things. That should have told me something about what was coming. The Thanksgiving invitation was mine. I'd offered to host because I didn't want to spend the holidays sitting across from the empty chair where Carol used to correct my carving technique. If I filled the house with people, I could manage it. I invited my neighbor Ed and his wife, my college friend Bernard, who'd been driving up from Cincinnati every holiday since his kids moved west, and, of course, Wesley and Marissa and Lily. I'd been cooking since 6 in the morning, turkey in the oven, 2 kinds of pie, the green bean casserole that Lily had specifically requested, with the crunchy stuff. By 2 in the afternoon, the house smelled the way it was supposed to, and I felt something close to okay. Wesley and Marissa arrived at 3. Lily came through the door first, in the turkey print dress, shoes on the wrong feet. She corrected that herself before anyone said anything, and then announced that she had learned the word magnificent and was going to use it in a sentence. She looked at the food on the counter and said, "That's magnificent, Pop Pop." I put her to work tearing bread for stuffing. It was the best part of that afternoon. Dinner was on the table by 4:30. My neighbor Ed was in the middle of a story about his brother-in-law's boat when Wesley's phone buzzed. He glanced at it under the table the way people do when they think no one's watching. I watched. He excused himself about 10 minutes later. Marissa was talking to Bernard about something. Home prices, I think. Some conversation that had started with the condo. And she didn't look up when Wesley pushed back his chair. "Just need to make a quick call," he said. "Work thing." Be right back. He took his coat off the hook by the door. His coat. In November. For a work call. I watched him go out to the side yard and I told myself it was nothing. Carol used to say I anticipated problems so hard that I invented them. Maybe that's what I was doing. Lily had stopped eating. She was watching the window. I didn't notice that until later. At the time, I was refilling Bernard's wine and agreeing that, yes, the market was genuinely insane, and yes, I'd gotten in at the right time with this house. It was Marissa who noticed Lily had gone quiet. She reached over and pushed a piece of turkey toward Lily's plate and said something gentle. I don't remember what. Lily said, "Where did Daddy go?" Marissa said, "Outside, honey, making a call." Lily looked at me. I don't know how to explain the look, except to say that it was the look of a child who has already decided to do something she hasn't announced yet. She got down from her chair. I assumed she was going to the bathroom. She went out the front door. I didn't follow her right away. It was maybe 3 or 4 minutes before I registered that she hadn't come back. Bernard had moved on to some story about a road trip he was planning, and Ed's wife was asking Marissa something about curtains, and I kept one eye on the front hallway and then stood up and said I was going to check on the kids. I opened the front door. Lily was standing on the porch in her socks. No shoes, no coat. She'd come in from the side yard and she was standing there not moving. And when she heard the door open, she turned around and I saw her face. She'd been crying. Not the loud kind, the kind that happens when something genuinely frightens you and you are trying very hard to hold it in. I went to her immediately, crouched down so I was at her level. Hey, what happened? What's wrong?" She looked past me into the house. Then back at me, she said very quietly, Pop, Daddy was on the phone talking about you." I kept my voice steady. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand. He said there was a way to make it look like an accident. And someone said something I couldn't hear, and then Daddy said your name. The air went out of me. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean I was crouching in my own doorway on Thanksgiving, looking at a 6-year-old in a turkey dress and wet socks, and I felt something leave my body, something structural. I brought her inside. I kept my face calm. I settled her on the couch with her tablet and her headphones and told her to watch her show. I had to help with something in the kitchen. Then I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and looked out the window at the side yard. Wesley was still out there. I could see the silhouette of him through the bare hedgerow. His posture was wrong, too stiff, turned away, hands moving. He wasn't just talking to a client. I ran through the possibilities the way I run through load calculations. Organized, methodical, eliminated the ones that didn't fit the data. He had stepped out in November with his coat on. He had done it during dinner. He had talked about making something look like an accident. He had said my name. I thought about the will, about the house, about how I'd been meaning to update the documents since Carol died and kept putting it off, about the down payment on the condo, about how my insurance policy, the one Carol and I had taken out together, still listed Wesley as the sole beneficiary. I thought about the smell of the gas furnace. I'd been having it serviced every fall for 20 years. But I'd skipped this past September because of a back thing and told myself I'd get to it in December. I went down to the basement. The furnace is at the back of the basement, behind the water heater. I'd replaced it 6 years ago, top of the line. The kind with the digital readout and the sealed combustion system. Carol used to tease me about how much I'd spent on it. "It's a furnace, not a spaceship," she said. I looked at it and I didn't see anything immediately wrong. I looked at the flue, at the exhaust pipe, at the fresh air intake on the far wall. The intake cap was sitting at a slight angle. This is the thing about being an engineer. Most people would walk past that. Slightly off-kilter cap on an intake pipe. Probably just vibration, probably nothing. But I stood there and looked at it for a long moment, and then I got my flashlight from the utility shelf and I looked closer. The intake screen had been partially blocked. Not obviously. Not with tape or a rag or something that would be noticed at a glance. Someone had wedged a compacted wad of steel wool, the fine kind, the kind that looks like nothing, into the inner edge of the screen, around the perimeter, leaving the center open. Enough airflow to prevent the furnace from shutting itself off on a safety fault. Not enough to prevent carbon monoxide from building slowly in a closed house over the course of several hours. Several hours, like, say, the duration of a Thanksgiving dinner, with the windows closed because it was November. I stood there in my basement, and I understood what I was looking at. I took pictures with my phone before I touched anything. Then I removed the obstruction carefully and sealed it in a plastic sandwich bag from the utility shelf. Then I went back upstairs. Wesley was back at the table when I came up. He'd refreshed his plate. He was laughing at something Bernard had said. Marissa was cutting Lily's turkey into smaller pieces. I looked at my son's face, and I looked for something. Some sign that I was wrong. Some tell that this was a misunderstanding. Some version of this moment in which the explanation was simple and harmless. Lily had misheard. The steel wool had been there for years. There was a reasonable explanation for all of it. His eyes met mine, and he smiled. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Just checking on the furnace," I said. "That old thing?" "Still running? Just fine," I said. "Running perfectly." I went to the counter and picked up my phone and stepped into the hallway and called 911. I kept my voice low. I said there was something I needed an officer to look at. I gave my address. The dispatcher asked if it was an emergency, and I said I didn't know yet, but I thought it might be. She said someone would be there shortly. I went back to the table. I sat down. I picked up my fork. I did not eat anything. The knock at the door came about 20 minutes later. I got up before anyone else could react. Wesley frowned at me. "Who's that, neighbor?" I said. "Back in a minute." There were 2 officers on the porch. Young, both of them, the kind of young that makes you feel your age in your knees. I showed them the photographs on my phone. I showed them the plastic bag. I explained, concisely and without emotion, what I'd found, what it would do, and how long we'd been in the house with the furnace running. One of them went around back to verify. The other one stayed with me. Inside, I could hear the voices at the table. Bernard's laugh, Marissa asking Lily if she wanted more pie. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. The officer who'd gone to check came back. He looked at his partner and gave a small nod. They asked me to step aside. What happened next was not like television. There was no shouting. Wesley stood up from the table when he saw the officers come through, and he went very still in a way I recognized. It was the same stillness he had as a child when he'd been caught in a lie, a full-body pause while he calculated his next move. He said, "What's this about?" One of the officers said his name, asked him to step outside with them. Wesley looked at me. Not at Marissa. Not at Lily. At me. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know what he saw. I looked back at him with nothing on my face because there was nothing left in me to show. He went outside. Marissa put her hand over her mouth. She looked at me and said, "What did you find?" I said, "Something I'll explain when I can." Lily climbed off her chair and came and stood next to me and put her hand in mine. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. The arrest happened on the porch. I didn't watch it. I was inside with Lily and Ed's wife, who had put the television on and was pretending to watch football with the calm efficiency of a woman who had seen things she didn't understand and decided hot coffee was the appropriate response. She made me a cup without asking and set it in front of me. Bernard sat with his arms crossed and his face very still. He looked at me once and said, "You know what you're doing?" I said, "Yes." Marissa had gone outside. I could hear her voice through the window, high and fractured and disbelieving. I don't know what she said to him. I never asked. What I know is that when the officers drove away, she came back inside and sat at the table and looked at her plate and then looked at Lily and then looked at me and said, "I didn't know." I believed her. I still believe her. That is the part that is both easier and harder than anything else. The investigation took several months. The phone records came first. Wesley had been in contact with someone the police described as a person of interest in another county, someone with a history that I was given details about and have since chosen not to revisit. The working theory, as it was explained to me by the detective assigned to the case, was financial pressure that had been building for over a year. Wesley had leveraged things he didn't own against debts he hadn't disclosed. The condo. Money from his company's accounts. He had borrowed from people who charged a different kind of interest. My life insurance policy would have solved his problem. The house, sold in probate, would have handled the rest. The phrase the detective used was deliberate and premeditated. He said it the way people say things when they have said them many times before. I sat across from him in a government gray office and nodded and took notes on the yellow legal pad the way I used to take notes in engineering meetings, and I did not cry until I was back in my car in the parking lot. Then I sat there for a while. The trial was in the spring. I wore the tie Carol bought me for our 30th anniversary, a deep burgundy with a small geometric pattern. I don't know why. It felt like bringing her with me. Wesley entered a guilty plea on the charge of attempted murder. His attorney had negotiated something, some arrangement I don't fully understand and was not party to. The judge sentenced him to 14 years. The courtroom was not dramatic. There was no moment of revelation or collapse. Wesley stood at the podium in a gray suit and said the required words and was led away. I watched the back of his head until the door closed. Marissa and Lily still come on Sunday sometimes. Not every week. Marissa is rebuilding things, getting her bearings, and some weeks she just needs the time to do that. But Lily calls me on Tuesdays now, which is the day we used to go to the park, and she tells me what happened at school and what words she learned and what she thinks is magnificent. Last week, it was a documentary about deep-sea fish. The week before, the first snow, I had the furnace inspected in December. Both the technician and I stood in the basement, and I showed him what had been done, and he was quiet for a long moment and then said, "You're lucky you caught that." I said I knew. He said most people wouldn't have looked. I said I knew that too. I updated my will in January. The attorney asked if I had any dependents to consider. I thought about Lily. I thought about Marissa. I wrote down their names. There is something that people say, and I used to believe it, that you know your own children, that you understand the people you raised, because you were there at the beginning. You saw the whole construction. You know where the foundations were poured. I was an engineer for 31 years. I know more than most people about how structures fail. It is almost never the dramatic thing, the earthquake, the flood, the force of nature you put in the disaster models. It is almost always the slow thing, the incremental thing, the small deformation under constant pressure that nobody checked because it had always been fine before, and there was no reason to expect it to change. I loved my son, and I stopped inspecting the load-bearing walls. That is what I have to live with. But I also have this, a 6-year-old who put on her shoes wrong and fixed it herself before anyone told her to, who walked across a side yard in her socks because something didn't feel right and she didn't have the words for it, but she had the instinct, who stood next to me at the worst Thanksgiving of my life and held my hand without being asked. Carol would have said that kid is going to be something. Carol would have been right. I still make the green bean casserole with the crunchy stuff. I make it for every holiday now. Lily requests it every time, and every time acts surprised that I remembered, which is the most 6-year-old thing I have ever witnessed. Some structures hold. That's the thing about engineering that people don't tell you. For everything that fails, something else holds. You look at the numbers and you think about what went wrong, and then you put the plans back on the table and you start again. That's all any of us can do. Trust the children when they come to you with something they can't explain. Listen when they say something is wrong. They don't have the vocabulary yet for what they're sensing, but they are paying attention in ways that the rest of us have forgotten how to. Lily is 7 now. She knows the word magnitude. She used it in the sentence last Tuesday. She said, "Pop, I think some things that happen have a magnitude that's too big to see all at once." I told her that was exactly right. I've been turning this over for almost a year now, and the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the furnace, or the phone records, or even the courtroom. It's a 6-year-old in a turkey print dress, standing on my porch in her socks, trying to tell me something she didn't have the language for yet. That's where it starts, I think, with paying attention to the right things. I spent 31 years in structural engineering. The whole job is understanding how things bear weight, how much stress a system can absorb before something gives. And the uncomfortable truth, the one I had to sit with after everything came out about Wesley, is that I applied that rigor everywhere except the place that mattered most. I checked the load-bearing walls in buildings I'd never set foot in again. I didn't check them at home. I told myself I knew my son. Knowing someone and understanding the pressure they're under are two very different things, and I confused them for years. That's not guilt talking. It's just the calculation, run honestly. What I believe now not because anyone told me, but because I watched it happen in real time, is that the choices we make under pressure reveal something that was already there. Wesley didn't become someone capable of this because of the debt. The debt was just the circumstance that made visible what had been building quietly for a long time. The deception, the entitlement, the belief that his problem was someone else's responsibility to solve. Those things don't appear overnight. They accumulate, small increment by small increment, and a person who was never asked to reckon with them. And I didn't ask. That's on me. But here's the other side of it. The part I hold on to. Lily didn't hesitate. She was 6 years old, and she walked across a cold side yard in her socks because something felt wrong, and she decided that telling me mattered more than staying comfortable. That is not a small thing. That is a kind of moral clarity that most adults spend decades trying to find, and she had it instinctively because nobody had yet taught her that looking away was easier. I think about that a lot, about what it means to still be that honest with yourself, to not have learned yet how to rationalize, how to talk yourself out of the thing you already know is true. Children aren't wiser than adults. They just haven't accumulated the habits of avoidance yet. The question is whether we help them keep that instinct, or whether we slowly teach it out of them by modeling exactly the opposite. Lily is 7 now. I don't know what her life is going to ask of her. I don't know what pressures she'll face, what debts, financial or otherwise, she'll be tempted to solve the wrong way. What I do know is that she already understands something that took me 67 years to fully accept, that the truth is not always convenient, and that saying it anyway to the right person at the right moment is not a small act. It is sometimes the act that changes everything. I updated my will in January. I had the furnace inspected. I started paying attention to the things I'd been deferring. That's all any of us can really do. Run the honest calculation. Fix what's fixable. And trust the kid who comes running back in her socks.